The rain came down soft and steady, a thin drizzle that misted the parking lot of a tired strip mall on the edge of town. Inside the convenience store, fluorescent lights flickered, casting a cold glow over shelves of canned goods, plastic-wrapped sandwiches, and magazines no one bought anymore. The door chimed as it closed behind an elderly man, Walter Reyes, his steps slow, deliberate, a cane in one hand, a bulging plastic bag in the other. He'd made it halfway across the cracked linoleum when the bag betrayed him. The thin plastic tore with a sharp rip, and cans of soup and beans clattered to the floor, rolling in every direction. Walter reached out instinctively, but his balance wavered. His cane slipped, the rubber tip screeching against the tile. He teetered, caught himself against a shelf, breathing hard, heart hammering from the shock of the near fall. A laugh broke the silence. A teenager, maybe 16, leaned against the ice cooler near the door. His hoodie was too big, phone raised high, recording it all. "Look at this," the boy said, snickering. "Fought in some war, old man, but can't even fight gravity." The word stung sharper than the fall would have. Walter's knotted hands gripped the shelf tighter. The store went still, customers frozen mid-step, the cashier pretending to study a lottery ticket display. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sounds were the soft tap of rain against the windows and the whir of the store's ancient refrigerator. Walter stared at the scattered cans, at the wreckage of a simple errand. His face flushed, not from exertion, but from the quiet humiliation. And then, when it seemed no one would act, when even the walls seemed to shrink back in indifference, a figure stepped forward. The figure who stepped forward wasn't remarkable in appearance, a man in his early 30s, plain dark sweatshirt, worn jeans, boots scuffed from work. He moved with an easy, quiet purpose, crouching beside Walter without a word. The teen's smirk faltered, phone lowering slightly, as if the simple presence of the man disrupted the scene he'd been eager to capture. Walter glanced at the stranger, his breath still uneven, his body stiff with embarrassment and the weight of years. The man began gathering the scattered cans, setting them carefully in a neat pile. The gesture was small, but in that moment, it felt like a lifeline. And as Walter knelt too, reaching for a can that had rolled beneath the chip rack, memory swept over him, sharp, vivid, unstoppable. It wasn't the pain in his knees that made him wince as he moved. It was the memory of deck plates under his boots, the salt spray of the Pacific, the deafening roar of engines as his ship cut through endless waves. He had been 20 then, Walter Reyes, seaman first class, standing on the deck of a destroyer, watching the horizon for shapes that meant danger. He could still hear the voice of his friend Sam, shouting over the wind, "You see that, Reyes? That's freedom out there." 40 years had passed since those days. 2 tours in the Pacific Fleet. Letters home that smelled of oil and salt. Medals he never displayed. He'd come back to a small town, married his sweetheart, worked the post office route until his knees had failed him, and buried the woman he loved. The weight of those years sat heavy on him now as he reached for another can, fingers trembling slightly. "Didn't think I'd still be dodging blows at my age," he muttered, the words barely audible, meant more for himself than anyone else. But the man beside him heard. A slight turn of the head, a flicker of something in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or understanding. He didn't speak, just kept working, hands steady, movements unhurried. Walter felt the moment shift. It wasn't just about fallen cans anymore, or the sting of humiliation. It was about memory and dignity, about the simple decency of helping when no one else would. He glanced up at the teenager, who was still watching, phone lowered but not put away. The boy seemed unsure now, caught between mockery and discomfort, the moment not playing out as he'd intended. Outside, the drizzle thickened, the soft patter against the windows filling the silence. A delivery truck rumbled past, its tires hissing on wet asphalt. The cashier, a young woman with tired eyes, kept glancing between the scene and the register, as if wishing someone else would take charge. Walter's thoughts drifted again, to his wife's laugh, to the quiet pride he'd felt in wearing his uniform, to the nights he'd sat alone on his porch after she was gone, watching the stars and wondering if anyone remembered the man he used to be. He hadn't expected kindness today. Hadn't expected anything but another lonely errand in a town that seemed to have grown younger and faster while he'd slowed down. And yet here was this stranger, wordless but present, reminding him with each can he picked up that not all was lost, that sometimes decency showed up when you least expected it. The last can retrieved, the man stood and offered Walter a hand. Walter hesitated for a beat, then took it, feeling the strength in the grip, the unspoken promise of it. Their eyes met briefly, Walter's lined with age, the other man's marked by quiet resolve. The teenager shifted uncomfortably, looking away, phone slipping into his pocket. Walter straightened as best he could, leaning on his cane. His heart felt steadier now, the rush of humiliation fading, replaced by gratitude and something else, something like hope. He glanced again at the man who had helped him, noting the grease stains on his sleeves, the scar that cut a pale line along one brow. Not a hero, perhaps. Not in the storybook sense. But a good man. And in that moment, Walter knew this day would stay with him, not for the fall, not for the mockery, but for the hand that had reached out in silence and lifted him when he most needed it. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft and steady, washing the world clean. The quiet of the moment hung between them, fragile as glass. But like all fragile things, it didn't last. The teen shifted, drawing up his hoodie as if to shield himself from the weight of what had just unfolded. His fingers toyed with his phone again, thumb hovering over the screen. His smirk returned, not as confident as before, but defiant, a mask against the discomfort that crept up his neck. "Whatever, man," the boy muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Guy should have stayed home if he can't handle a grocery bag." The words landed sharp, slicing through the fragile thread of grace that had started to weave through the air. The cashier winced. A woman at the back of the store, she'd been pretending to study the dairy case, let out a short, brittle laugh, as if the boy's cruelty had given her permission to feel superior too. Walter froze. His fingers tightened on the cane, white-knuckled. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His voice felt trapped, the years of quiet endurance closing around his throat like a fist. He had fought battles far from home, stood firm against storms and steel and fire. But here, in this small, indifferent store, facing the jeer of a child and the silence of neighbors, he felt smaller than he ever had in his life. The man beside him, Elijah Carr, though no one in the store knew his name yet, didn't flinch at the boy's words. He simply bent once more, gathering the last of the scattered cans that had rolled beneath a shelf. He placed them carefully into a new plastic bag he'd pulled from his own coat pocket, as if he carried such things out of habit, prepared for small disasters. The teenager, seeing no rise, no argument, grew bolder. He sauntered closer, knocking over a rack of chips with a careless elbow, sending bags cascading to the floor like yellow and orange confetti. "Oops," he said, mock surprise thick in his voice. He glanced around the store, waiting for laughter, approval, anything. But the store remained silent. The customers, once frozen, now seemed made of stone, faces turned away, eyes fixed on anything but the scene before them. The cashier opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, swallowing her words with a visible effort. The injustice thickened in the air. Walter, breathing heavily, tried to stoop again, to help with the mess. His knees screamed in protest, his hand slipping on the slick floor as he reached for a fallen bag of chips. "No, sir," Elijah said quietly, his voice the first words he'd spoken. He placed a steadying hand on Walter's shoulder, guiding him upright. "Let me." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was a calm finality to it, the kind that didn't invite challenge. The teen faltered, the weight of the man's gaze finding him now, steady and unwavering. He shuffled his feet, scuffed the floor with one battered sneaker. But pride, or fear of looking weak, kept him from backing down entirely. "Whatever," the boy muttered again, but softer this time. He stuffed his hands in his pockets, edging toward the door. Still no one else moved. Not the woman by the dairy case, who suddenly found the price tag on a carton of milk endlessly fascinating. Not the man in the baseball cap by the magazine rack, who studied the covers as if reading headlines could erase his presence from this uncomfortable tableau. Walter felt the isolation as keenly as he had when he'd stood watch alone on the deck of his ship, ocean stretching endless in every direction. But this was worse. The ocean hadn't meant harm. The indifference here did. Elijah finished gathering the chips into a neat pile, setting the rack upright with deliberate care. He didn't look at the teen again. Didn't look at the customers. He focused only on Walter, on righting what he could in this small, disheveled corner of the world. When the last bag was in place, Elijah straightened, offered Walter the new bag of cans, and gave a single nod. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and unbroken, as if trying to wash away the small cruelties and silences that had filled the store. The teenager hesitated at the door, glancing back once, as if unsure what story he'd captured on his phone, or whether he wanted to keep it. Then he pushed out into the rain, the chime of the door loud in the hush he left behind. And still, no one spoke. Not yet. The boy was gone. The door's chime echoed once more before the quiet swallowed it whole. Outside, his figure blurred in the drizzle, hoodie drawn tight, shoulders hunched, not with victory, but with something closer to retreat. The store remained frozen for a breath longer, the moment stretching thin as paper. And then, at last, something shifted. Elijah turned, his face calm, his expression unreadable. The weight of his gaze swept the store. He didn't glare. He didn't scold. He simply looked, at the cashier, at the woman by the fridge, at the man by the magazines. Each person felt it in turn, the silent judgment of presence. The reminder of what they'd chosen not to do. He crouched beside Walter again, gathering the cans properly this time. No hurry. No wasted motion. The soft rustle of plastic, the quiet clink of metal as met can, these sounds filled the space like a bomb. Walter watched him work, heart slowing, shame fading beneath a rising sense of something like gratitude. The storm inside him eased. The cashier looked away, cheeks coloring. The woman by the fridge shifted, suddenly fascinated by the contents of her purse. The man in the cap put down his magazine and, with visible reluctance, moved toward the fallen chips, bending to help straighten the mess the teen had made. His hands fumbled, unused to the task, but he did it anyway. Elijah's back, broad, solid, shielded Walter from the view of the others, from the lingering traces of humiliation. The teenager's camera had found nothing now but a man helping another man. No drama. No spectacle. Just quiet dignity. "You his bodyguard or something?" the boy had asked before leaving, voice cracking with false bravado. Elijah hadn't answered then. But now, in this silence, his actions spoke louder than any retort could have. He handed Walter the new bag. Their eyes met, brief, but full of meaning. Thank you," Walter said, his voice low, thick with emotion he tried to steady. "I don't know what to say." Elijah shook his head once. "Don't need to say anything," he said, voice soft but firm. He rose, standing straight, towering over the scattered groceries, the fixed stares of those who had witnessed the scene unfold and done nothing until it was safe. The rain outside intensified, drumming steady against the glass. The storm seemed to want to wash the world clean of its small shames. Walter adjusted his grip on the cane, his stance steadier now. His breath evened out. His eyes found Elijah again, studying him, this stranger who'd stepped forward when no one else would. The cashier spoke at last, voice thin, almost tentative. I'm sorry, sir. Do you need help out to your car?" Walter shook his head gently. "No, thank you. I'm fine now." Elijah said nothing. He moved to the door, pausing just long enough to hold it open for Walter. The chime rang again, gentler this time, as if marking a different kind of exit. The man in the cap followed behind, mumbling something about how he should have helped sooner. The woman by the fridge kept her head down, shame plain on her face. Outside, the rain mingled with the scent of asphalt and ozone, cool and clean. Walter stepped into it, feeling the water touch his skin, the air fresh and alive after the heavy stillness of the store. Elijah walked beside him, silent, steady. They reached Walter's car, a weathered sedan with dents that spoke of years, of battles with curbs and careless drivers and time itself. Elijah opened the door for him, placed the bag inside, and stepped back. Walter hesitated, hands on the frame of the car. He looked at Elijah, searching for words, for something that could carry the weight of what he felt. But Elijah shook his head again, a small, almost imperceptible smile at the corners of his mouth. "No need, sir," he said. "Just, take care." And with that, he turned, heading back across the lot, boots splashing through puddles, shoulders squared against the rain. Walter watched him go, the figure growing smaller, rain blurring his outline until he seemed almost part of the storm itself. Inside the store, the customers began to move again, shaken loose from the grip of their own inaction. The cashier wiped her eyes. The man in the cap left without buying anything. And the teenager's video? It would be deleted before the night was over, not out of guilt, but because it didn't tell the story he'd hoped for. The real story wasn't one of mockery. It was one of quiet strength, of a man who'd stepped forward without fanfare, without needing to be asked, without wanting thanks. A man who, in the face of small cruelty, chose kindness. And that choice, small as it seemed, had changed everything. The rain eased as Walter settled behind the wheel of his car, watching Elijah's figure grow smaller with each step. The younger man moved without hurry, as if the storm and the weight of what had passed didn't touch him. His boots splashed through shallow puddles, and the dull thrum of rain softened against his shoulders. Walter sat for a long moment, hands resting on the wheel, eyes on the man who had knelt beside him without a word, who had stood between him and humiliation without needing to speak. A strange warmth filled him, pride, perhaps, or the quiet joy of knowing decency still existed in the world. He didn't drive away immediately. Instead, he waited until Elijah had crossed the lot, until he had disappeared through the back door of a small auto shop that shared the strip mall's cracked concrete. The sign above the door read Cars Garage, the letters faded, the paint chipped by years of sun and storm. The next morning, the store's security footage made its quiet journey online. Not by the teen, who had long since deleted his shaky, mean-spirited video, but by the cashier, who had spent the night replaying the scene in her mind, guilt gnawing at her edges. She uploaded the clip without commentary, just the raw footage, an old man struggling, a younger man stepping forward, no spectacle, no speeches. The internet noticed. Comments trickled in at first, then poured. "This is what being a man looks like. My dad was a vet. Whoever this is, thank you. Strength is quiet. Respect. But while others spoke his name, because the shop sign gave him away, Elijah himself stayed silent. No profile, no post, no acknowledgement. The world spoke for him. He didn't seem to care. Walter, meanwhile, felt the tug of unfinished business. Days passed before he found the right moment, the right words. Then, one morning, he folded a small object into a piece of cloth, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and drove back to the garage. The lot smelled of oil and rain-washed concrete. Inside the open bay, Elijah worked beneath the hood of an old pickup, sleeves pushed up, hands slick with grease. He didn't look up at first. The world, after all, had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Walter stood quietly, cane in hand, waiting. Finally, Elijah straightened, wiping his palms on a rag. His eyes met Walter's, surprise flickering there, but not discomfort. Just that steady, open gaze. "I wanted to see you," Walter said. His voice was stronger today. The embarrassment of that afternoon had faded, replaced by something sturdier. Elijah nodded once. "Everything all right?" Walter smiled, small but genuine. "Better than all right." He stepped forward, offering the cloth-wrapped bundle. Elijah hesitated, then took it, unwrapping it slowly. Inside lay a small velvet box, old but cared for. He opened it to reveal a navy insignia pin, silvered by age, edges smoothed by years. "I served so people could live free," Walter said quietly. "But you reminded me, freedom without kindness doesn't mean a damn thing." Elijah studied the pin for a long moment. He didn't try to hand it back. He understood, without words, what the gift meant. "Thank you," he said simply, voice low. They stood there in the garage, the air thick with the smell of oil and old metal, the sound of rain beginning again on the tin roof. No cameras. No crowd. Just two men, generations apart, bound for a moment by respect. Behind them, the world moved on, the buzz of tools, the chatter of a radio playing soft in the corner, the hum of tires on wet pavement outside. Walter left that day lighter somehow, as if a burden he hadn't known he'd carried had finally been set down. And Elijah? He tucked the pin into his shirt pocket, went back to his work, and said nothing about it to anyone. The legacy of the moment wasn't in words or headlines. It lived in the quiet shift of hearts that had witnessed kindness and remembered what it looked like. And it lived in Elijah's simple, steady choice to be the man he himself had once needed, a choice that left ripples far beyond the walls of that garage. Night had settled over the small town, and with it, a hush broken only by the gentle hiss of tires on wet streets and the soft hum of distant television sets. Inside homes, people scrolled through their feeds, their fingers pausing on a grainy video that had begun to spread, one that showed no fight, no outrage, no viral stunt. Just a man helping another man. The footage came from the convenience store's security camera, quietly uploaded by the cashier who had seen and regretted her own inaction. The clip showed Walter, fragile and struggling, and Elijah, calm and steady, kneeling beside him, gathering cans, shielding him from the boy's phone. There was no audio, no narration, just the truth of what had happened. And that truth spoke louder than any commentary. It started small, comments trickling in from neighbors, veterans, strangers who recognized decency when they saw it. "This is what strength looks like. My dad was a Navy man. This made me cry. Thank you." Forget the kid with the phone. The real story is the one who helped. Within a day, local news stations picked it up. Then regional outlets. A clip of kindness, in a world that seemed starved for it. The garage phone rang more often now, not for repairs, but for interviews. Elijah said no to all of them. He kept his head down, kept working. He didn't want to be a headline. He hadn't done it for that. In the days that followed, people came to the shop, not for brake pads or oil changes, though some made excuses to schedule those too. They came to shake his hand, to thank him. Elijah accepted their thanks with quiet grace but offered little in return beyond a nod or a soft, "Glad I could help." Walter visited the garage a few days later, stepping carefully across the damp lot, leaning on his cane. Elijah spotted him and wiped his hands on a rag, coming out to meet him. "I owe you something," Walter said. Elijah shook his head. "No, sir. You don't owe me a thing." But Walter insisted. He opened his hand to reveal a small velvet box, worn at the edges but still dignified. Inside was a silver navy insignia pin, polished by age and care. "I served so people could live free," Walter said, his voice steady despite the emotion that trembled beneath it. "But you reminded me, freedom without kindness doesn't mean a damn thing." Elijah accepted the pin, turning it over in his fingers. He didn't try to give it back. He understood what it meant. He tucked it into his shirt pocket that day, and though he never wore it openly, he kept it close, where it could remind him who he aimed to be. The video spread farther. A high school principal played it at an assembly, telling the students, "If you want to change the world, start like this." A father shared it with his son who had been caught bullying, hoping it would show him what words had not. A local veterans organization sent Elijah a letter, offering to honor him at a luncheon. He declined with thanks. The spotlight wasn't what he'd been after. What mattered most to Elijah wasn't the praise. It was the small changes he saw afterward, the cashier keeping extra bags behind the counter, ready for those who might need them. The man in the baseball cap, who'd once frozen in place, now helping customers carry heavy loads to their cars. The woman by the fridge signing up to volunteer twice a month at the community center. And Walter came by now and then. Sometimes he brought coffee, sometimes just conversation. They talked of small things, weather, engines, the kind of day it had been. Rarely of that afternoon. They didn't need to. Months passed. The video's place in the world's attention faded, overtaken by newer events. But in the hearts of those who'd seen it, the memory stayed. And in Elijah's pocket, that pin remained, a silent reminder of what had mattered in that moment, of the choice he'd made not because anyone was watching, but because it was right. On an autumn afternoon, the air crisp and smelling of rain, Walter found Elijah leaning against the side of the garage, watching the sky deepen into dusk. "My wife used to say something," Walter said, voice low. Elijah glanced over. "She said, a good man doesn't need to tell you he's good. You'll know." Elijah smiled, small and sincere. "She sounds like she was smart." She was, Walter agreed, the ache of loss softened by the warmth of memory. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the last light slipped behind the trees, casting long shadows on the cracked concrete. No reporters. No cameras. Just two men, bound by a shared understanding. And somewhere, across screens and in hearts, that moment, the one where kindness rose quiet and unbidden, lived on. Quiet legacy.